Welcome back again to another Java short tutorial. And in this Java short tutorial I'm going to explain how to use methods in Java. Contrary to my other tutorials, I will start this tutorial by a code example that I've already written. So in this particular code example I am declaring two variables, then add those two numbers up together and print out the sum of those two methods. After which I will declare another two numbers, add those two numbers up and print it again. I guess it will take not really a big stretch of the imagination to imagine that if I need to do multiple calculations in a row, this is not a very efficient way of programming. So what would actually be better is if we can use a method to do the calculations for us and just make use of that method to actually do the calculations. So how do I go about doing that? Well, let me first just start by defining a very simple method, which is done below the main method, but inside the class body, so between these two accolades. So how do we define a method? Well, we say public static void, meaning public static being the modifier, void being the return type of the method, so in this case meaning the method returns nothing. Then the name of the method, which could be any name. So in this case I will simply call it add two numbers. And in between the two brackets behind there I will provide the input for this method, so what goes into the method. So typically these will be two variables of the type integer, namely integer num1 and integer num2. Then after declaring the method header I open the accolade and close the accolade. So like very much with the main method, where all the code is between the two accolades, the code of the method is also written between the two method accolades. So what will we do inside this method? Well, very simple. I'm going to add these two numbers together, so num1 plus num2, and write the result in a variable called result. And then I'm going to use a system.out.println to print the values. So how do I want to print it in this case? Well, I'm going to do a bit more complicated format than was shown here. So I'm going to say the value of num1 plus a text with the mathematical operator plus the value of num2 plus a text with the equals operator plus the result. So now I'm basically done writing my method. So now I can actually go about simplifying the code in the main method by, instead of doing this calculation and printing, simply calling this method and providing variable a and b as the input of the method. So how do I do that? Well, very simple. Just key in the name of the method, add two numbers, and provide the variables that I would like to have added up, so a and b as the parameters, separated by a comma, following this format. Same thing for the second method, but instead of providing a and b as the parameters, naturally I will provide c and d as the parameter. So now let's run this. Okay, so 25 plus 17 is 42. The answer to life, the universe and everything. And 10 plus 25 is 35. So another variation of this method could be, instead of receiving two integers, two doubles, an integer and a double. So I'm going to modify my code here to say double b equals 17.5 and a remains 25. While for the second method header, for the second method call, I'm going to say I'm going to turn d into a double and 25 into a value of 995. So in this particular case I need to modify my method a little bit, because if I add an integer and a double, the result cannot be an integer. So in this case I'm also going to change the value of a variable result to a double. So now if I execute this, it still works. Yeah, I just did this example to illustrate that parameters can be of different data types. Lastly, if I want to simplify this even more, instead of declaring two variables and use those two variables as a parameter, I can also put values directly in my method call. So there you go. If I run this program, the output will still be the same. Okay, so here you have it, a void method that receives two numbers as the input and prints out the result. So there's one more other variation of the method that I'm going to very quickly explain, which is the non-void method, which is the opposite of a void method and therefore returns a result where the void method does not return a result. So again, let me just create one additional method, because you can create as many methods as you like in a program. As a matter of fact, it's a good practice. So I start again with the public static modifiers. Then instead of the void return type, I say I want to return a double, because I want to return a decimal number. And I'm going to name this method multiply two numbers. And I'm going to receive again an integer and a double. Again, accolade open and accolade close. I now get an error here, and the reason is because I'm not returning any value yet. No worries, I will take care of that in a moment. So again, I'm going to say double result 1, in this case, slightly different name, equals num1 times num2. And then, since I don't want to print this value, I'm simply going to say return result 1, and then the error disappears. Why? Because this method requires a double to be returned, and now a double is returned, namely the variable result 1, which is of the type double, and it is returned via the return statement. So this means this value will be sent back to whichever method is calling this method. Let me demonstrate. So again, I'm going to stick with A25 and 17.5 for the method call. So in this case, I'm going to say multiply two numbers, and again I'm going to provide A as the input and 17.5 as the other input. However, since this is a non-void method, I need to store the result in a separate variable. So if I hover over this, it will actually say multiply two numbers, which receives an integer and a double, has a double as output. So what do? So I declare a variable called double in front of it, called result 2 maybe, equals multiply two numbers. And then I go about printing this. So I can say multiply, let's call it multiply 1, plus result 2. Then for my second method call, and again I'm going to copy this whole thing because I'm way too lazy to type all of it again. I'm going to say okay, I'm going to invoke multiply two numbers again, but this time I'm going to provide the C variable and the 9.95 variable. I'm going to save the result in a double variable called result3, which I will be printing in the following print line. So what will happen, and I guess I can best demonstrate this with a breakpoint. So I'm going to add my breakpoint here, because I don't care so much about the multiplication, and a breakpoint here. So now let's run. I don't care so much about adding the two numbers. So debug as Java application, go to debug mode. So there we go. So my program has now stopped at the point where it's about to invoke multiply two numbers. So let's go into multiply two numbers. So now we jump to the multiply two numbers method. You can actually see that num1 contains a value of 25 and num2 contains a value of 17.5. So if I go to the next line, result 1 is executed and result is given the value of 437.5. Then this value is returned via the return statement. So now we are jumping back to the main method. So if I go to the following line, you can actually see that result 2 has the variable 437.5, which is then printed to my console. Same thing for the second method call, so I'm just going to continue it. So as you can see, multiply 1 results in the value 437.5 and multiply 2 results in the value 99.5. So there you have it, a very simple and quick example of a void method and a non-void method. Basically, these methods can be written with any combination of data type parameters and any return type. But to keep the length of this video minimum, I will leave it with this simple example. See you next time.